Breath of the Wild was a fantastic game in many ways, but I think most would agree that it left room for improvement. Longtime fans of the series, such as myself, found many aspects to be lacking compared to earlier games, and old and new fans alike have identified flaws the game has in its own right. The sequel has an opportunity to fix those issues, and it would be a shame if it didn't happen. This is FP Productions, and here are 5 improvements I'd like Breath of the Wild 2 to make over the first, in order from least to most important. One gripe that almost everyone seems to have is how easy it is to break weapons. A rare weapon might not even last through a single enemy camp, and it makes these things feel like cheap rewards when you find them in shrines. The durability system is important for keeping the survival and foraging aspects of the game relevant, but that doesn't mean there's no room for improvement. In the sequel, there are 3 things that I think would fix this. First, weapons in general should last longer. They can still break, but I don't want to cycle through 10 of them while fighting a single Lynel. Next, there should be a meter that shows exactly how much durability is left. In Breath of the Wild, it's a sheer guessing game. You never know when weapons are approaching the about to break point, or exactly how many hits they can deal out once they get there. Finally, there should be some way to repair them. A lot of people have suggested adding a blacksmith to the game, but I think it would be better if you could repair weapons on the go using materials, similar to refilling fuel in the Master Cycle. Whatever the solution, the weapons system as seen in Breath of the Wild definitely needs some refinement. In most Zelda games, you add new items to your toolkit throughout the entire adventure. The excitement at wondering what you're going to get when you enter a new dungeon is a huge part of the fun. In Breath of the Wild, however, you get the majority of your items within the first hour or 2 of the game, and all that's left to discover is the camera. Don't get me wrong, the camera is an awesome feature, but I wish there had been more optional runes to get. Assuming the sequel adds new runes at all, check out my video on ideas I had for those, by the way. I'll link it in the video and description. I think some of them should have to be unlocked instead of being granted right at the start. Of course, this doesn't apply just to runes. Whatever new kind of abilities Link gets could follow this same concept. Now, some of you might be thinking that Breath of the Wild already did this, with the champion abilities unlocked after each divine beast. This was a great start, and getting these abilities was satisfying. However, they were basically just enhanced versions of things Link could already do, unlike the runes that granted him brand new abilities. I'd like to see more of the second type of thing in the sequel. Okay, this one's not an improvement per se, but it is something that needs to happen. The world of Breath of the Wild was incredible, and had to be the main selling point of the experience. However, using it again in the sequel without any significant changes would be a disaster. It would make the world feel stale and give both games less of their own identity. In order to really offer its own unique experience, the sequel needs to make more than a few touch-ups to the vast world of Hyrule. There are many ways to make this happen, but in general I think it would come down to rebuilding the kingdom. If Breath of the Wild was about surviving in a post-catastrophe world, then the sequel can be more about exploring the kingdom closer to its former glory. This was teased in Age of Calamity, but with the hectic, fast-paced nature of that game, we still didn't really explore the kingdom before it was in ruin. In the sequel, familiar locations should have new attractions and maybe even be larger, and there should be a number of brand new towns or outposts where formerly there were ruins. This is only the beginning of the possibilities. With the divine beasts back under control, maybe they've been used to change up the geography to an extent. Whatever Nintendo goes with, I'm very curious to see how they make a world we've already explored feel fresh. Another thing that nearly everyone has criticized is Breath of the Wild's story. I agree with this, but to be more specific, I think the issue lies in the storytelling, not the plot events themselves. The story, or technically the backstory, is pretty good. It features conflict between the two main characters, character growth on Zelda's part, failure from both protagonists, and real consequences. The problem is that all of the major twists and turns are over and done with from the moment you boot up the game, and discovering them through memories just isn't the same as triggering them yourself as the game progresses. This is something the sequel has to fix. Let's compare this to other Zelda games. Spoiler warning, by the way. In Skyward Sword, you pursue Zelda and show up just in time to save her and Impa from Girahim, and the direction of the plot changes as a result. In Twilight Princess, you collect the fused shadows, and Zant responds by shattering the Mirror of Twilight. Again, the plot develops in a new direction. In Wind Waker, you confront Ganondorf, but he was one step ahead all along and almost defeats you, changing your plans entirely. The examples go on, but what they have in common is that the plot continues to twist and turn as you go through the quest, and the status quo is always different. In Breath of the Wild, the way things are after you clear the Great Plateau is basically the way they stay for the rest of the game. Sure, you restore peace to the major regions and pull the Master Sword, but all that does is make the final boss a little easier. There's no Phase 2, no new objectives or plot developments. In the sequel, I hope the story is structured more like previous games, where events continue to unfold as a result of your actions, right up until the final boss. For me, this is the biggest of them all. Everyone said it already, but I cannot stress enough how weak the Divine Beasts were compared to earlier Zelda dungeons. Even the most complex one, Va Naboris, feels half as long as a traditional temple. Each one basically boils down to solving 5 small puzzles to activate the terminals, and they all have exactly the same look and atmosphere. The sequel has so much opportunity to improve that it would be bizarre for it not to. Designing a traditional dungeon would be tricky with Breath of the Wild's open approach to everything, but I think it could be done. Just imagine if each dungeon was the size of Hyrule Castle, but with locked doors, tricky puzzles, a mini-boss, and a new item. Put each one in a different geographical climate in a standard Zelda fashion, and you'd have an amazing set of dungeons. The lack of this was a major letdown for me in Breath of the Wild, and it would be an even greater disappointment for another game to go by without large, complex labyrinths like the series is known for. Well, those are 5 improvements I hope Breath of the Wild 2 makes. Let me know what you'd like to see the game improve on in the comments. If you're looking for more Breath of the Wild 2 content, check out my video on 5 new rune ideas or some speculation over the trailer. This is FP Productions, and I'll see you next time.